Hi, it's James with Cowboy 43 Productions here, and I am doing a video where I share some of my thoughts on atheism, part 5. So in my last video, I ended up talking about how science and atheism go hand in hand. And that's really kind of weird because it's like one of the biggest arguments against God is quantum physics. Things exist on a quantum level, which is like microscopic. And somehow, that might be an argument against God, I guess. I don't know. But in this video, I'm going to talk about just how atheism relates to society. So, is atheism good for the world? I would have to answer this question by looking at all the variables. In an episode of Closer to Truth titled, "What is the New Atheism?"
Philosopher Anthony Grayling tells us that while atheism may be a neutral position, he says the atheist is more likely to be a secularist and a humanist, which may not be good views on what is best for society.
Secularism. In a secular worldview, people will often live without religion, and they will follow more trending topics. Recently, we have seen issues with the mixing of genders in society. And while that is a matter of personal freedom, in practice, it can end up leading to unfair situations. Humanism. In a humanist worldview, everything is basically meaningless. The agnostic scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson uses the term, "we are stardust," to describe our world. We are a rock floating through space. We are chemicals assembled together through a series of natural processes. Humanists would look only at the physical, material world. I would say skepticism is important. I have watched these atheists on YouTube, and it can be a lot of hype for the entertainment value.
These creators have to maintain followers, and so of course they are going to continue to provide over-the-top content.
Obviously, there are going to be times when atheists are on point, but we can also take a step back and look at the situation more closely.
I had a coworker who found out I was a Christian, and he tried to throw different Bible verses at me to show how they contradict. I was pretty stressed out at first, but then I realized he was taking each verse out of context and telling me about them to cause doubt, which spoke to his understanding of them as well.
As I read the actual Bible passage and not just the verse, it became clear to me that the Bible passages were talking about different things.
In a YouTube presentation by Holy Kool-Aid on calling out abuse in the atheist community, atheist Thomas calls out aggression and bullying in the atheist community. Thomas explains that he identifies himself best with the atheist community, but often he sees how things are taken too far and boundaries are crossed. He steps in to address this and to teach people how to act with respect.
90% of the stuff that we see is for the purpose of generating outrage and anger. When we're talking to others outside of our community, we dehumanize them. They're other, they're Christians, they don't get it. They're conservatives. There's these tribalistic dividing lines. We fail to see the person behind the keyboard. Instantly, the internet descended upon them, the fangs drawn, ready to attack. We have no concern for how we make others feel.
There is a popular channel on YouTube, Anthony Magnabosco, where atheist Anthony practices street epistemology. He will set up on a walking trail or a public space and ask passers-by about a belief they feel strongly about, and many people will often bring up their God belief. In the discussions, people will sometimes say they follow their God belief because it helps them have a better life, and Anthony is quick to challenge this, saying that as an atheist, he has an amazing life without God.
Do you have like 5 minutes to just have a conversation about God? Okay, cool. My name's Anthony. What is your name, sir? All right. You're Christian then?
Yeah.
How strong are you on the belief if, let's say, 0% was I don't believe and 100% was I absolutely believe? Where would you put yourself on that? I appreciate your honesty.
Because it helps them have a better life. This is a common argument people will make in favor of religion, known as the prosperity gospel, the idea that God is there to bless us, But the Bible
encourage you. God has great things in store for you. But I want to let you know that you have the power that's within you. When the Holy Ghost comes upon you, the Holy Spirit comes upon you, you can tread on serpents. You can tread on a devil's head. You can decree a thing. And I believe in here today that you're going to start thinking it and it's going to start manifesting. I feel it now. You're going to start thinking and it's going to start manifesting. It's going to start happening just like that. You're going to start saying, Lord, I need this and this, and it's going to start happening just for you. You're going to start prophesying. You're going to be speaking what God has for you to say. This is going to be the generation that God is going to use.
But the Bible does not fully support this. I think the Apostle Paul might say, believers shouldn't be concerned when they see non-believers living the good life, as it were, as their blessings are superficial.
The question sometimes gets asked, are atheists morally bankrupt?
The church I grew up in, the pastor would talk about how he grew up as an atheist, and he turned his life around as he became a believer. His mother had a similar testimony, and her sister spoke about it once, saying we knew a version of her sister that was kind and generous, but that was not the version of her sister she grew up with.
I connected with this as I remembered being angry with God as a teenager. I let go of a number of bad habits as I came to faith. Other atheists will say, no, 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 they are not part of these crowds. They have values, they take care of their families, they're good to their neighbors, and they're just looking for a place in this world. Can atheists and theists coexist?
Well, as my pastor growing up went off to seminary, his father disowned him. As his mother came to faith, it unfortunately led to a divorce. What brought reconciliation decades later was when the father had a friend lead him to faith.
I have friends who go to family events, and Jesus is unfortunately the elephant in the room.
A friend wanted to pray before dinner, even though his friends were not believers. When he asked them if it was okay if he prayed, they said, "Oh, that's fine, go ahead." There was a girl on TikTok who was invited over to a Christian family's house for dinner, and she complained about having to sit awkwardly as they said grace.
Like, duh, don't make any Christian friends. I remember a couple years ago, I was praying with my mom while she was sick in the hospital, and a relative bursts out laughing like, ha ha ha! And then I was also cautioned beforehand not to say anything religious while I was up there. Nah.
A friend worked as a secretary at a school, and she was playing Christian music on low volume in her office. And one day, the administration came in to address it, saying there had been complaints. You know, there's a lot of Jesus going on in here. I was on a ride-along with my boss, who was doing home construction estimates, and he asked a customer, "Are you a Christian?" And the man said, "Not really." My boss asked, "Why?" The man said, "Because I don't need religion to know how to be a good person." My boss went on a whole talk about his faith, and somehow he still made the sale. A friend of mine got saved a few years ago, and when she got baptized, her brother, who was an atheist, supported her by taking photos and videos of the baptism. There was that news story of a bakery that refused to make a cake for a couple because the cake violated their religious beliefs, and the bakery was taken to court.
Like, dude, cakes are expensive. Give your money to some other shop.
In an article by The Conversation titled, "Why It Matters That 7 States Still Have Bans on Atheists Holding Office," author Christina details 7 states in the U.S. that have bans on atheists holding office.
To be fair, some states also ban members of the clergy.
The author details how a socialist or an atheist candidate would be the least likely to gain public confidence at the voting polls. In an episode of Closer to Truth titled, "What is the New Atheism?" atheist Michael Shermer supports this idea, saying,
I mean, you can be a black, gay, woman, Muslim president before an atheist would get elected as a white male.
Right.
I mean, that's how bad it is.
Right.
And you hear it in the rhetoric. People think nothing of saying things like atheists are not as moral. Would you say a Jew is not immoral or a black? No, you would never say things like this.
He says many in the atheist community are only fighting for their place in society.
Like in this last election, I absolutely did not want to vote for Trump or Biden. But if there was an atheist on the ticket too, I might have to consider them.
I can try and answer some of these fears. In the book Faith is for Weak People, author Ray Comfort details how in many of your socialist and especially communist countries, religion is either controlled or banned completely.
The government and its propaganda becomes the main focus. I have friends who are missionaries. There are obviously people living openly as atheists in the US, but in places like communist China and North Korea, there are many underground churches.
So for a socialist candidate, people would feel this goes against their values as a democracy. And then for an atheist candidate, people would worry the atheist fails to answer to a higher power outside of themselves.
So for the atheist being sworn in as president, that may seem like a disconnect for him. Mr. Jackson, please place your right hand on the Bible. I, President Jackson, swear to uphold and defend the values of the United States of America. So help me God. Just kidding. I personally use discernment when engaging with the atheist community online. You go to church or you watch theist activists, and their audience is generally happy and passionate about their God belief.
Last week we talked about the red light and the green light, praising God for one and not the other. Kind of foolish. You know, the green light is only as effective as the red light. Y'all want all green lights in the city of Charlotte where everybody's just smashing into each other all the time? So why do we want all green lights from God? Just to be crashing into stuff that we could have avoided if we would have heard his voice.
You look at atheists online, and their audience tends to be more on the attack.
Fewer than 1 in 5 Americans adhere to the naturalistic view of evolution that we teach in our science classes. 73% of Americans believe that you have to invoke God if you're talking about the origin and diversity of life. And that's pretty sad. Creationists always lead the pack between 40 and 42%, and the data have held steady over these years. This is the era of David Attenborough, of Steve Gould, Steve Jones, Richard Dawkins. Evolution is everywhere. Theistic evolutionists are usually between 30 and 40%, and then naturalistic evolutionists, the people who are right, well, we see this heartening uptick here. It's almost doubled in the last 30-odd years. So it's gone from 9 to 19%. So I'm hoping that this is a real change, a sea change, but we don't know for sure.
This is not to say theists don't accuse atheists of lacking morality. I just see a greater range of aggression from atheists. But you know, one time I commented on a post online, and the person, who was an atheist, replied back to explain the context of what they were talking about. I replied back, "Thank you." The person replied, "No problem." They knew atheists could be somewhat condescending when engaging with theists. I was happy for the discussion.
Are atheists smarter than theists?
I was pondering this question, and I saw how one user on Quora came up with an answer. There are plenty of smart people on both sides of the argument.
I know that isn't really a mic drop answer.
When a newly committed atheist makes a YouTube channel, they tend to make predictable videos where they bash the book of Genesis, for example, and how it doesn't make sense.
Let's do a series. Let's talk about all of these Bible stories that were fed to us, that were indoctrinated into us growing up, and let's read them now from the perspective of someone who is questioning or walking away or has walked away from their faith, and see if we feel the same way about these stories as we did when they were being taught to us in the church. With all of these Bible stories we were taught growing up, Adam and Eve, Lot and Sodom, Noah's flood, the Tower of Babel, and even into the New Testament, there are all these stories that were presented to us in a very specific way with a specific goal in mind, and we weren't really taught these stories in a way that allowed us to examine them, unpack them, scrutinize them, and decide for ourselves how we felt and what we believed about them.
A process of which optimism turned to skepticism, turned to mental despair. How through isolating and dissecting just one Bible story sent the infallibility of the entire Bible crashing down.
Theists tend to argue against science. I know different theists who have told me they are taught to filter their beliefs through the Word of God, or to make the science fit the Bible.
You would probably see an atheist say, we should study science objectively, and we should come up with answers that can be peer-reviewed. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together. You have to search out the right connections. You can't just clip the puzzle pieces and try to make them fit. The puzzle won't look correct afterwards. Are atheists biased? You can get a really smart person, and that smart person becomes very confident in themselves and less likely to look at other viewpoints or accept correction. So it's like they're right all the time, even when they're wrong. Why don't you believe in God? Science! Can you offer further details? Charles Darwin?
I have been in church groups where people get confused when science is brought up and the pastor has to intervene. I have seen atheists speak with overconfidence, like there is nothing more to the situation. The atheist may be just as closed off as the theist, but at least they can discuss the subject. You know, we all need that button pusher who keeps us from living in the dark ages, and that might just be the person who doesn't buy into the established situation. Every so often, you'll have a theist on YouTube make a video featuring questions atheists are unable to answer. Then, Genetically Modified Skeptic will release a video, and the Atheist Experience will release a video, where they'll say, "Oh, but we can," and they'll jump in with an answer of some sort. In a YouTube presentation by Apologetics Roadshow titled "Atheists Trusted Sam Harris Until," host David follows atheist Sam from a lecture where Sam comments on, quote, Jesus' mood swings, as he recalls a quote from Luke 19. As Sam recalls the quote, he says Jesus is telling his disciples to do something violent.
Jesus orders Peter and James and John to bring his enemies before him and to slaughter them. I don't recall the apostles doing anything like that. Maybe I should look that one up. But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. But wait a minute, there's an extra quotation mark here.
David explains that in the passage from Luke 19, Jesus was telling his disciples a parable from a real event involving King Herod, and that Sam may have been looking for a quick example to be able to discredit Jesus. David tells us this is concerning, as the audience may not know about the passage and would think they were getting accurate information from Sam. He tells us he has seen Sam make these misrepresentations before while talking about Christianity and Islam. David then attempts to look at Sam's methodology by bringing up a recent time when Sam discussed the re-election situation with President Trump, and he focused on how important it was to keep Trump from being re-elected, even if there was a whole political situation with candidate Biden and his son Hunter at the time. David includes quotes as he tells us he began to understand the thought process, saying the way Sam sees it, if something is a big enough threat, he doesn't see a need to be fair or honest in discussing it. In a YouTube presentation by MythVision titled, Why Do You Believe What You Believe?, author Derek and guest Anthony discuss belief. Derek recalls how he thought his faith helped him get clean from drugs, and he says, as he thought it through, he realized maybe it was himself all along. Then, metaphorically, you see the video segue into a plot twist, where a background voice says, "It turns out it was you all along. Hee hee. Wink." Anthony discusses faith as truth versus comfort, saying that most people can't back up their belief claims, even though they are comforting, and so he uses his discussions to show people this error so that they can hopefully walk away from their God belief.
I think you're right that there's these psychological underpinnings to these views, and people don't realize it until you engage with them in a respectful way where you make them the focus and actually have them reveal their reasons. And when it gets down to it, they usually can't justify those reasons. They have poor methods, and it's usually meeting a psychological need.
So, in this thought process that Derek and Anthony are discussing, they are doing their best to take God out of the equation by introducing a bottom-up perspective, as opposed to the top-down perspective used by theists. It's all very philosophical.
Are atheists biased?
In a YouTube presentation by Inspiring Philosophy titled, Are Atheists Biased?, creator Michael argues that atheists will often say they only go where the evidence leads them, but he doubts the atheists' ability to change their opinion when given new evidence, just like theists struggle with evidence that contradicts their beliefs. Michael cites a few studies in his video, saying that anti-theists specifically tend to struggle with several categories, more than people who aren't familiar with religion or who lack interest in it will.
In 2014, it was found that anti-theists scored higher in dogmatism, narcissism, anger inventory, and neuroticism than any other type of non-believer, and that the assertive anti-theist, both proactively and aggressively, asserts their views towards others when appropriate, seeking to educate the theists in the passé nature of belief and theology. In other words, anti-theists view religion as ignorance and see any individual or institution associated with it as backward and socially detrimental.
For atheists and theists, both groups can tend to have biases fueled by their own emotional reasoning. The way Michael looks at it, each group believes they are following the correct path.
You can get a really smart person, and that smart person becomes very confident in themselves and less likely to look at other viewpoints or accept correction.
Michael points out the obvious, saying anti-theists are likely to view religion as being an unnecessary obstacle and a risk to society. Previously I mentioned how theists tend to get all weird when science is brought up. Well, I'll also see atheists online say how they only believe in science. Then they'll try and say they don't believe anything in the Bible to be historical, especially not the supernatural truth claims.
Part of this makes sense, but then some of your atheists will make it seem like we can't trust anything written in history. This can be dangerous, as you have people that say that Jesus Christ never existed, or the resurrection couldn't have happened,
or the testimonies in the Bible are unreliable. Then we'll have people who look at modern events and say the Holocaust never happened,
or the moon landing was faked, or 9/11 was a conspiracy.
In a YouTube presentation by BuzzFeed video titled, I Survived the Holocaust Twin Experiments, survivor Eva is interviewed on her forced participation in Nazi experiments during World War II. Eva recalls how decades after she was rescued, she met back up with a doctor who had to live with the horror of what had happened. The doctor was able to travel back to the camp with her and provide her with an official, signed confession document, so that if Eva ever came across a revisionist who tried to say the Holocaust did not happen, she could shove the document in their face. Many of your atheists will note that testimony is the lowest form of evidence, but I find it to be the most powerful, as long as it is not forgotten. In a YouTube presentation by Apologetics Roadshow titled, World's Smartest Atheist Finally Admits What Christians Knew All Along, host David discusses cult-like tactics displayed by atheists, such as the trending term, Sky Daddy, which pops up regularly in atheist social media posts. In looking at atheism and bias, David looks at two separate interviews with famous atheist Peter Atkins, where Peter is asked what evidence he would accept that would cause him to change his view on God's existence. Peter is asked about his reaction to different supernatural experiences, and he explains that he would attribute the experiences to madness or forgery, or look for alternate explanations if they happened to him. As he says, these explanations are more likely than seeing evidence for God. David compares this to similar answers from atheists Richard Dawkins and Matt Dillahunty. As David concludes, any evidence can be explained away by people who are committed to a position. In a YouTube presentation by the Atheist Experience on divine hiddenness, Host Matt asks the question, if God exists, can he show himself in a way that is undeniable? When confronted by a caller, John, who tells him that God will show himself to him once he takes an action of repentance, Matt responds with yelling and swearing. He tells the caller that even if God did show himself to be real, he still wouldn't choose to follow him. It's noted that Matt was once a believer. Obviously, some part of this makes sense. If God exists, he can show himself to us in a way that makes it clear he exists.